Hi BookTube, it's Amy. So I am now the proud owner of another book by book collector Rosenbach. And this is his The Unpublishable Memoirs. Now, purchasing Rosenbach's books secondhand in, the editions in which they were published, not print on demand, can get a little bit more expensive than purchasing other contemporaries. People know Rosenbach, his books are in fairly high demand, and so coming across this for, I think it was $40 plus the shipping, seemed like a pretty good deal to me. And so this is only the second book by Rosenbach I've had the opportunity to read. Now, of course, I could go and start buying print on demand or ebooks, but I would much rather wait until I own the books myself in the original hardcovers. But this is, and I'm going to show you this Bibliophines frontispiece here. This is not Rosenbach's memoir, but rather it is a kind of fictional memoir of a book collector, an art collector, and more than a collector, more of a book thief and an art thief. And I've been enjoying it so far, and so I thought I would sit down and read a little bit of it to you. So this was published in 1924, and it begins with the theft of a book. So chapter 1 is titled The Unpublishable Memoirs. It was very cruel. He was dickering for one of the things he had desired for a lifetime. It was in New York at one of the famous bookstores of the metropolis. The proprietor had offered to him for $160, exactly the amount he had in bank, the first and only edition of the Unpublishable Memoirs of Beau Brummel, a little volume issued in London in 1790, and one of two copies known, the other being in the famous hidden library of the British Museum. It was a scandalous chronicle of fashionable life in the 18th century, and many brilliant names were implicated therein. Distinguished and reputable families that had long been honored in the history of England were ruthlessly depicted with a black and venomous pen. He had coveted this book for years, and here it was within his grasp. He had just told the proprietor that he would take it. Robert Hooker was a book collector. With not a great deal of money, he had acquired a few of the world's most sought-after treasures. He had laboriously saved his pennies, and had, with the magic of the bibliophile, turned them into rare volumes. He was about to put the evil little book into his pocket when he was interrupted. A large, portly man, known to book lovers the world over, had entered the shop and asked Mr. Rodd if he might examine the Beau Brummel memoirs. He had looked at it before, he said, but on that occasion had merely remarked that he would call again. He saw the volume on the table in front of Hooker, picked it up without ceremony, and told the owner of the shop that he would purchase it. "Excuse me," exclaimed Hooker, "but I have just bought it." "What?" said the opulent John Fenn. "I came especially to get it." "I'm sorry, Mr. Fenn," returned the proprietor. "Mr. Hooker here has just said that he would take it." "Now look here, Rod, I've always been a good customer of yours. I've spent thousands in this very shop during the last few years. I'll give you $200 for it." "No," said Rod. "300?" said Fenn. "No." "400? No. I'll give you $500 for it. If you do not take it, I shall never enter this place again." Without another word, Rod nodded, and Fenn quickly grasped the little book and placed it in the inside pocket of his coat. Hooker became angry and threatened to take it by bodily force. A scuffle ensued. Two clerks came to the rescue, and Fenn departed triumphantly with the secret of the noble families of Great Britain securely in his possession. Rod, in an ingratiating manner, declared to Hooker that no money had passed between them, and consequently there had been no sale. Hooker, disappointed, angry, and beaten, could do nothing but retire. At home, among his books, his anger increased. It was the old case of the rich collector gobbling up the small one. It was outrageous. He would get even, if it cost him everything. He dwelt long and bitterly upon his experience. A thought struck him. Why not prey upon the fancies of the wealthy? He would enter the lists with them. He would match his skills against their money, his knowledge against their purse. Hooker was brought up in the mystic lore of books, for he was the son of a collector's son. He had always been a student, and half his time had been spent in the booksellers' shops, dreaming of the wonderful editions of Chaucer, of Shakespeare, of rare Ben Jonson, that some day he might call his own. He would now secure the priceless things dearest to the hearts of men, at no cost to himself. He would not limit his choices to books, which were his first love, but he would help himself to the fair things that have always delighted the soul. Pictures like those of Raphael and Da Vinci, jewels like Cellini's, little bronzes like Donatello's, etchings of Rembrandt, the porcelains, Truming, and of old China, the rugs of Persia, the magnificent. The idea struck him at first as ludicrous and impossible. The more he thought of it, the more feasible it became. He had always been a good mimic, a fair amateur actor, a linguist, and a man of parts. He possessed scholarly attainments of a high order. He would use all his resources in the game he was about to play, for nothing deceives like education. And it had another side, a brighter, more fantastic side. Think of the fun he would get out of it. This appealed to him. Not only could he add to his collections the most beautiful treasures of the world, but he would now taste the keenest of joys. He would laugh and grow fat at the other man's expense. It was always intensely humorous to observe the discomfiture of others. With particular pleasure, Hooker read that evening in the Post this insignificant paragraph. John Fenn, president of the 10th National Bank of Chicago, departs home tonight. He laid the paper down immediately, telephoned to the railroad office for a reservation in a sleeping car leaving at midnight, and prepared for his first banquet. Hooker shaved off his mustache, changed his clothes and his accent, and took the train for Chicago. As luck would have it, John Fenn was seated next to him in the smoking car, reading the evening papers. Hooker took from his pocket a book catalogue issued by one of the great English auction houses. He knew that was the best bait. No book lover that ever lived could resist dipping into a sales catalogue. Hooker waited an hour, it seemed like 5. Fenn read every word in the papers, even the advertisements. He dwelt long and lovingly over the financial pages, running his eyes up and down the columns of today's transactions. He at last finished the perusal and glanced at Hooker. He said nothing for a while and appeared restless, like a man with money weighing on his mind. This, of course, is a very distracting and unpleasant feeling. Several times he seemed on the verge of addressing his fellow traveler, but desisted from the attempt. Finally, he said, "I see, friend, that you're reading one of Sotheby's catalogues." "Yes," answered Hooker shortly. "You must be interested in books," pursued Fenn. "Yes," was the brief response. "Do you collect them?" "Yes." Fenn said nothing for 5 minutes. The stranger did not appear to be very communicative. "Pardon me, Mr. I am also a book collector. I have quite a fine library of my own." "Really?" "Yes, I always visit the shops when I go to New York. Here is a rarity I picked up today." The stranger expressed little interest until Fenn took from his pocket the Unpublishable Memoirs. It was wrapped neatly in paper, and Fenn carefully removed the little volume from the wrappings. He handed it to the man who perused so assiduously the auction catalogue. "How extraordinary!" he cried. "The lost book of old Brummel. My people were acquainted with the Bow. I suppose they are grilled right merrily in it. Of all places, how did you come to purchase it in the States?" "That's quite a story, a queer thing how I bought it. I saw it the other day at Rod's on 5th Avenue. I did not buy it at first, the price was too high. I thought I would be able to buy it later for less. This morning I went to see Rod to make an offer on it when I found that Rod had just sold it to some young student. The confounded simpleton said it belonged to him. What did that trifler know about rare books? Now I know how to appreciate them." "Naturally," said the stranger. "I have the finest collection in the West. I had to pay a stiff advance before the proprietor would let me have it. It was a narrow squeak by about a minute. The young jackass tried to make a scene, but I taught him a thing or two. He'll not be so perky next time. How my friends will enjoy this story of the killing. I can't wait until I get home." The The stranger, with the freshly shaven face, the English clothes, and the austere eyes, did not seem particularly pleased. "How extraordinary," he said coldly, and returned to his reading. Fenn placed the book in his pocket, a pleased expression on his face, as if he were still gloating over his conquest. He was well satisfied with his day, so intellectually spent among the banks and bookshops of New York. "By the way, I am acquainted with this Rod," said the Englishman after a pause. "He told me a rather interesting story the other day. But it was, in a way, a boomerang. I don't like that man's methods. I'll never buy a book from him." "Why not?" asked the inquisitive Mr. Fenn. "Well, you'd better hear the tale. It appears he has a wealthy client in Chicago, that he occasionally goes out to sell him some of his plunder. He did not tell me the name of his customer, but according to Rod, he is an ignoramus and knows nothing at all about books. Thinks it improves his social position. You know the type. Last winter, Rod picked up for $50 a beautifully illuminated copy of Magna Carta, issued about 100 years ago. It's a fine volume, printed on vellum, the kind that Dibdin raved about, but always considered a plug in England, worth about 40 guineas at the most. You know the book." Fenn nodded. "Well, it worried Mr. Rod how much he could ask his Western patron for it. He left for Chicago via Philadelphia, and while he was waiting in the train there, he thought he would ask $200 for it. The matter was on his mind until he arrived at Harrisburg, where he determined that 300 would be about right. At Pittsburgh, he raised the price to 500, and at Canton, Ohio, it was 750. The more Rod thought of it, its glowing colors and its lovely old binding, the more the price soared. At Fort Wayne, Indiana, it was $1,000. When he arrived at Chicago the next morning, his imagination having had full swing, he resolved he would not under any circumstances part with it for less than $2,000. "The old thief!" exclaimed Fenn with feeling. "It was a lucky thing," continued the stranger, "that his client did not live in San Francisco." At this, Fenn broke into profanity. "I always said that Rod was an unprincipled, unholy, unmitigated—" "Wait until you hear the end, sir," said the Englishman. That afternoon he went and he called on the Western collector. He had an appointment with him at 2:00. He left Rod waiting in an outside office for hours. Rod told me he was simply boiling. Went all the way to Chicago by special request, and the brute made him cool his heels until 4:00 before he condescended to see him. He would pay dearly for it. When Rod showed him the blooming book, he asked 3,500 for it. Would not take a penny less, and he told me, sir, that he actually sold it for that price." "Don't you believe it," said Fenn hotly. "Old Rod is an unqualified liar. He sold it to me for $5,000. That's what he did, the damn pirate." "How do you know, sir?" "How do I know? No," he repeated excitedly. "I ought to know. I'm the fool that bought it." Without another word, Fenn retired to his stateroom. The next morning, when Fenn arrived at his office in the Fenn building, he called to one of his business associates, who, like his partner, was interested in the acquisition of rare and unusual books. "I say, Ogden, I have something great to show you. Picked it up yesterday. In this package is the wickedest little book ever written." "Let me see it," said Mr. Ogden eagerly. Fenn gingerly removed the paper in which it was wrapped, as he did not wish to injure the precious contents. He turned suddenly pale. Ogden glanced quickly at the title page, for fear he would be seen with the naughty little thing in his hands. It was a very ordinary volume, entitled "A Sermon on Covetousness, a Critical Exposition of the 10th Commandment by the Reverend Charles Wesley." "The devil!" exclaimed John Fenn. "How the old dodge works," said Robert Hooker to himself on his way back to New York. The duplicate package, known since the days of Adam, and how easy it was to substitute it under his very eyes. "I shall call Beau Brummell's Unpublishable Memoirs number 1 in my new library." And so he has pulled a bait and switch and stolen the book. And the next chapter here, we'll see. If you enjoyed this, let me know and I may read on. But the next chapter here is about the theft of a work of art titled "The Three Trees." in which he'll once again use his skill with disguises and his sleight of hand to carry off something that he would like as his own. So we'll leave it at that, and I will see you all again soon.